Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, and we're looking at the Domaine de Cotelleraie 2019 St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, Les Perruches. The Vallée family of Domaine de Cotelleraie have roots in St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil that date back several centuries. And the domaine had beginnings much like many of the wine estates that we find in the Loire Valley. When Claude Vallée established the domaine in the 1950s, it was a polyculture farm with just a handful of hectares of vines alongside asparagus, fruit trees, and other crops. Claude's son, Gérald, took over the domaine from his father in 1997, and today the estate is up around 27 hectares of vines, and they're focusing exclusively on viticulture. And they count among their holdings parcels in some of the top lieux-dits in the region. All of their 27 hectares of vineyards are planted with Cabernet Franc. And from these parcels, they are making 7 different cuvées. And these include among them 3 cuvées parcellaires, or single vineyard or single lieux-dit wines. And these include Les Maugurets, Les Perruches, which is the wine that we're looking at today. Also, Le Veau Jaumier. And each of these wines is coming from a slightly different terroir in the region. All of their vineyards have been farmed without synthetic treatments or fertilizers since 1999, and Gérald commenced organic certification of the vineyards in 2009, and they received their full organic certification as of the 2012 vintage. Now, the region of St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil is unique in the Loire Valley in that it is the only single village appellation in the region. And the region is relatively small. It only encompasses one village, St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, and it begins just at the western border of the Bourgueil commune, so that's in the Bourgueil appellation, and it extends west about 6 kilometers. And there's a few interesting things to note about the viticultural area and the soils here in this region. So first and foremost, right where St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil is located, the Loire River begins to take a little bit of a dogleg, a turn towards the northwest, towards Saumur. And because of that, the region as a whole actually has a bit more of a south-southwest exposure. This, coupled with the fact that we are very close to the opening of the Vienne River tributary here, these two factors combined actually mean that the climate of St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil is actually a little bit warmer than that of Bourgueil. Also, because of how the Loire changes course here ever so slightly, the area of vineyards that are on the ancient alluvial terrace, and that's the same ancient alluvial terrace that begins in the commune of Rastignier in the Bourgueil AOP and continues west through the Bourgueil appellation and then west further still into St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, this area of vineyards actually gets wider. So the area of vineyards that are on the ancient alluvial terrace actually accounts for around 65% of the vineyard area in the appellation. And as this ancient alluvial terrace gets wider, the area of vineyards that are on the côte, or the slopes, which is where we find the Turonian Tuffeau chalk-derived soils, that area, as well as the area of recent alluvium closer to the Vienne, these two areas narrow quite a bit. So this wine is coming from parcels that are on this little pocket of recent alluvium closer to the Loire. So this area of recent alluvium, it's about 3 kilometers north of the Loire. We are just south of the Changeon River. We're just north of the border of the commune of Chuzet-sur-Loire, which is in the Bourgueil AOP. And this area is relatively small. It's only about 800 meters from north to south, about 2.5 kilometers from east to west. And what's interesting is it actually sits up a little bit higher, about 30 meters above sea level, and the area around it is all this more rich, fertile land that isn't really great for viticulture, whereas here we have this little interesting kind of island of recent alluvium that is very good for viticulture. And in fact, this area has been long farmed to vine. It was actually the monks that identified this little area here many centuries ago. So this is a particularly interesting spot in the region for viticulture. And what's interesting about this recent alluvium is it is indeed different from the ancient alluvium that we find further north in the appellation. So this area is dominated by hydromorphic sands and hydromorphic clay sands that sit atop a flinty, gravelly subsoil that is rich in iron oxide. And these soils are, they're interesting because they have a good balance between water retention as well as drainage. And that makes them actually a little bit less susceptible to hydric stress, particularly compared to some pockets of more gravelly, sandy soils on the ancient alluvial terrace, which is kind of interesting. This wine is from 4 hectares of vines from a single lieux-dit. Les Perruches is the name of the lieux-dit. The vines were planted in 1979. And in terms of soils, we are dealing with these clay sands, and they're very stony soils, very gravelly soils. So we have these flint gravels, and then we have a subsoil of more flinty gravels after that. And the term perruche, actually this is a soil term, and we find perruche, or this type of soil, throughout the Loire in various pockets. And the term perruche actually indicates that there is some sort of flint component to the soils. So for the nerds out there that like to pay attention to this kind of stuff, if you see perruche on a label, front or back, that might give you an indication that that wine is coming from vines that are planted on some type of soil that has a flint component to it. Now, in terms of the winemaking for this wine, all the fruit is hand harvested. It is all destemmed as well. And the fermentation takes place in 60 hectoliter wooden vats with indigenous yeast, and the fermentation temperature hits about 28 degrees Celsius. The total time on the skins is about 1 month, and they will do some pigeage by foot, actually, in the first week, and then it'll be basically maceration through infusion for the duration of the post-fermentation maceration. And then in terms of aging, this is aged in older barrels for about 15 months before bottling. So let's dive in. So the nose is quite open, which is really nice. And it's been pretty open since the get-go. You know, this wine didn't need too much time to come around. And the nose has a lot of lift, a lot of fragrance, and a lot of perfume. And I would say the nose leans a little bit more on the earthy, kind of savory side. The fruits do take a little bit of a back seat. What kind of leads here is evergreen notes. There's a little bit of almost menthol kind of notes like thyme, mint, a little bit of nettle, even a little bit of currant leaf. And then what comes after that is a lot of spice. So I've got earth, I've got spice here. And the spice is kind of like clove, nutmeg. There's a little bit of fennel seed as well. And then we start to get into some of the fruits when you dig a little deeper. And the fruits for me are a little bit more on the darker side. So there's a little bit of a brambly edge to them. So there's a little bit of like currant here. There's a touch of like a dark cherry, a little bit bramble. There's even a little bit of like a plum thing going on as well. But I really love the nose. It definitely is one of those earthier styles of Cabernet Franc, which I totally love. But it's got great lift, great perfume. Just overall, it's very inviting on the nose. And there's a real distinctiveness as well. You know, when I was making my notes earlier, I was kind of noting that it felt very distinctive to me. And this is actually the first time I've kind of done a deep dive and analysis on one of these Cabernet Francs coming from these hydromorphic, very flinty gravels in this particular part of St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil. So instantly it felt like it was coming from someplace very distinctive. In terms of the palate is actually quite a bit more fruity, which is really nice actually. So there's like a little bit of, actually the palate leans a little bit more red. There's a little bit of like a wild strawberry thing happening, a touch more cherry. Those earthy, savory, kind of foresty menthol notes are still there on the palate as well. And I think it's a lot more spicy on the palate too, which is really nice. Yeah, there's so much complexity to the spice profile. As I mentioned, that fennel seed, so there's like a licoricey kind of component, but there's a bit of cinnamon stick on the palate as well, a bit of Sichuan peppercorns as well, which is really cool. And then underneath all of that is this wonderful layer of like a crushed rock, like a gravelly kind of profile as well, which is really, really nice. The acidity is juicy, it's bright, energetic. super persistent. You can see my mouth is watering here. And I love the profile of the acidity. So that juiciness gives this wine this wonderful Moorish kind of character to it. It makes you really want to dive back in. The tannins are lovely. And they're an element in this wine that I find really distinctive and really really attractive is a good way of putting it. So the tannins I would describe as like, I don't know, like silky in a way. Yeah, they're super, super fine, silky, but at the same time, there's like this kind of plushness to the tannins. So they're supple. So they're silky, supple, and they have like almost like a fleshiness to the tannins, which is really lovely. Super fine. This whole wine is really about fineness and finesse and elegance. And yeah, it's really quite pretty. The wine has a surprising amount of depth and concentration, which is really nice. You know, we often think of these alluvial soils here in St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, even in Chinon to a certain extent, as being, you know, these soils that are good for early drinking, fruity styles of Cabernet Franc that perhaps are maybe a little less age-worthy or less serious. But this feels a little bit different to me. There is a serious edge to this wine that comes through in the glass in terms of that depth, that concentration as well. And overall, I think it's doing a really nice balance between this ease and companionability and accessibility because of that juicy fruit. You know, the plushness of the tannins, the silkiness of the tannins is making this wine really, really delicious in its current state. But at the same time, you feel the tension, you feel the depth, you feel the seriousness about this wine. So I think this wine has someplace interesting to go for sure. Maybe in the short kind of medium term, like 5 to 7 years, I think it might be kind of interesting to see what happens with this wine, but it's super delicious and it's got a lot going on, which is really cool. And it actually makes me want to explore this particular area of recent alluvium with a little bit more depth to see what this area is all about. And this is a domaine, for those that aren't familiar with Domaine de Cotelleraie. This is a domaine I've been following for some time now. I've tasted with the estate at the fairs in the Loire, but I have not yet visited. And this is really one of the leading estates in St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, and it is high on my list of places to check out the next time I am in the region. And I hope this is one that folks can put on their radar. I should note that the production of this wine is usually kind of up around that 15 to 20,000 bottle mark, so it is a little bit more available, which is excellent. But this is truly one of the great domaines in St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, and you really do sense from the wines that there's a lot of care, a lot of attention to detail, a lot of meticulousness that goes into the wines, and it is a domain that I'm going to continue to seek out on this Cab Franc journey that I am on. If you are familiar with Domaine de Cotelleraie, do let me know what you've thought of the wines, maybe if you have a favorite, or perhaps if you have another favorite wine from St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, hit me up in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.